My name is Corinna Koenig, and I just want to give you a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm even interested in talking about existentialism and psychology. So I am a certified school psychologist. That's no longer predominantly my work role. Right now I work as a mental health professional. I do more counseling right now. This video is not associated with my role in either of those positions. It's not a form of mental health counseling. It should not be used as a mental health service. So don't use it that way. It really is just to discuss these ideas of existentialism and psychology. I am going to be looking down at times. That is because I did write out the concepts that I wanted to share with you guys. I didn't want to miss anything, and it helps to reduce cognitive load when you're trying to share information with people to do that. And so that is why I'm looking down at times. It's also part of being authentic by just telling you, like, look, I'm not trying to pretend like I have all this memorized or that I have it all together or anything like that. My main goal here is to share these concepts with you because I think that they're important concepts. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the term existentialism, I'm going to start there. And basically the most easy way to talk about that or to define it would be that authenticity is needed in pursuing the understanding of what it means to be human and in placing value and meaning to life. It's a really simple way of talking about existentialism. It goes much deeper than that, but for the purpose of this short video, I think it's going to be sufficient for us to move forward. So existentialism holds within its core notion that subjectivity or personal perception is really key to part of philosophical thought processes that are used to understand and place meaning to our life experiences. So this might seem like common sense to most of you out there, but previous to existential philosophers coming, into the, I don't know if you'd call it limelight, but coming into societal awareness, was that most philosophers were really interested in trying to be as objective as possible, trying to reach those objective truths with their thought processes. And the existentialists said, hey, wait, how can you remove yourself from processing anything? As human beings, it always goes through our subjective filter. And so we have to think of things in those terms, or at least add that to the conversation. So for those of you that aren't familiar, or that are familiar with the show Star Trek, thinking of as objectively as possible would be more like in line of the character Spock on the show, right? And so existential philosophers would say, no, let's take a step back and think of it in more subjective terms. Psychology is the study of the mind, the soul, thought processes, and human behaviors. So an example of existentialism might be that in life, somebody might feel a sudden feeling of meaninglessness in regards to their marriage, in regards to social customs, in regards to societal norms, maybe in regards to their job or even their spiritual or religious beliefs. This is different than feeling depression or anxiety because an existential crisis arises from fundamental structures in your sense of purpose or meaning in life being just torn down, no longer there anymore. So this feeling of maybe even being lost. So there's many things that can ignite existential crises in life. Some of what is going on politically in the United States could be creating existential crises for people that are out there right now. Just their belief in society norms or customs could be really being affected. Some of those foundational beliefs could be being torn down. So this is really pertinent conversation in the United States right now. So going back to the example, so an example of an existential crisis could be like if you're an artist and you suddenly lose the use of your arm or your arms, that could ignite an existential crisis because you are replacing a piece of your identity, of how you give meaning to life, of how you process things, of how you create, and that has been torn away from you. So if one quickly and promptly were to build a new meaning to life, or a meaning which incorporates this loss into their life, then an existential crisis could be either quickly or easily averted. If one wallows in the depths of meaninglessness occurring from this foundation being pulled out from under them, an existential crisis has occurred. And so Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus are only a few of the existential philosophers that raise the question, where does meaning come from? And while Kierkegaard and Nietzsche claim that meaning was derived subjectively, they both came to this conclusion from opposite ends of the spectrum. Kierkegaard considered himself to be more of a religious poet, while Nietzsche really he rejected the idea of a deity. And so they really came at it from different perspectives, but came to the same conclusion, that there was a subjective individuality involved in placing meaning to life and processing life. Sartre himself was a prisoner of war in 1940, and so his interest in existentialism may have been affected by him thinking about these concepts of life and death as they were in front of him. So Sartre would argue that each choice we make in life defines us. It helps to build our essence, but that our essence can change if we make different choices, take different actions to build a new piece of that essence, to build upon that essence. To create the essence of what we are, to make choices and move forward, we must place value on the idea of what we subjectively think is good or right or a smart way of being within our world. And Sartre talked about this really interesting concept of living in bad faith, which is the idea that people convince themselves that there's a particular objective truth to the way they have to be, right? So they have to have a certain kind of work, they have to live in a certain kind of city, they have to be married to a certain kind of person, they have to be involved in a certain kind of religious or spiritual belief. So maybe because society is placing meaning on things for them rather than them truly placing a more subjective value or meaning on something, or their friends or family are placing that subjective value or meaning on it more so than they are. And so what happens is people start to live in bad faith and live with less authenticity for what makes them happy, for what gives meaning and value to their life. So an example of this would be someone who's immersed in their job, especially if that job really holds meaning for the others around them, but not for themselves. And believing that he or she cannot consider themselves free enough to be something else, to do something else that would bring more happiness, more meaning, more joy to them. So an example of that would be like a lawyer thinking she's never going to be anything but a lawyer, not because she values that work or wants to be a lawyer, but simply because it's who she is. It's who her family sees her as, it's who her friends see her as, it's who society sees her as, and it potentially makes her a lot of money. So that sense of freedom has been willingly given up, and she herself may not even be aware of it. So Sartre believed that money helped keep people trapped in this living in bad faith. The need for money often leads to turning away from unconventional life choices that might bring more meaning, might bring more happiness, going against maybe the grain of what others are telling you to do. So Sartre's subjective view of the world, he felt capitalism was like a machine, trapping people in these jobs that they needed to purchase things that would not fulfill them, that would never really make them happy, because that is what society was telling them they needed, what their friends was telling them they needed, rather than going more inside of themselves and finding that authenticity, finding that subjective meaning and value in life itself. And life is just so precious. It's really the one commodity that we truly, as ourselves, own. If you guys have never heard of Kate Tempest, go check her out. She's a spoken word artist. She's a poet. This topic reminds me of her poem, Hold Your Own. She's really powerful. So Sartre argued that materialism leads people to deny themselves greater freedoms, that they're always working towards having all of these things that maybe they don't even have the time to enjoy, or maybe they do have the time to enjoy, but the job that they do or the things that they do to get that money leave them feeling empty, and the cost of it is not worth the benefits that they get from it. So they start to feel like they have this existential crisis, this crumbling of the foundation of the meaning of what they're doing. So Camus talks about this in a little bit of a different way. He talks about life being objectively devoid of meaning, that humans themselves continue to search for meaning in it. And he talks about the Greek myth of Sisyphus. Camus saw man's difficulty as searching for meaning in an unreasonable world. And Sisyphus defied the gods by putting death in chains so that humans could not die. Unfortunately for Sisyphus, the myth goes that death itself was liberated. Eventually it came time for Sisyphus himself to die, and despite attempt to escape the underworld, the gods captured him, gave him punishment, this eternal punishment of pushing this rock up this mountain, and every time it would get to the top it would fall back down and he'd have to keep pushing it. And so what you're looking at is this absurd cycle, this meaningless task, this meaningless eternal task that he can't get out of. And so even though Sisyphus lived life to the fullest, he hates death, he's still condemned to this meaningless task, which is like many of the jobs that some of us have right today. If we are living in bad faith, we are working these jobs that seems like these absurd meaningless tasks, or maybe there are jobs that we find more value or more meaning to, that align more with our personal authenticity in our life, that we aren't doing because we're so engaged in these meaningless tasks that we feel confined to. And so even when you think about this absurdity of the passage of time, the fact that cosmologists have the Big Crunch theory, which basically says that the universe will end essentially in a reverse Big Bang, makes everything sometimes seem outwardly really like meaningless or obsolete, these outward tasks. And so it's really up to us to derive what meaning, what value we feel we can get from life and from our time. And so Camus goes on, and he talks about Don Juan being this aware observer of how absurd life is, right? Like there's no real meaning in life. And so Don Juan is just very hedonistic, and he lives very fully and happily in each moment, loving each woman very passionately and fully, but without completely possessing her. And while Don Juan did indeed, observe the absurdity of the meaninglessness of life, he himself put a subjective meaning on it. And so he still had to put that subjective meaning on it, and his meaning was more in line with hedonism. And he, although not unhappy, at least that's not how the character was written, he did miss the complex understanding of one relationship or one woman, and he traded that for fleeting, depthless understanding of many women. So even Don Juan, who rejected the idea of like this overall meaning of life, even he himself was placing meaning, placing value to it in some kind of a way, right? Kierkegaard would argue that life is subjective and individual, and he himself was a knight of infinite resignation, and by his own terms believing beyond reason in God, to which he felt was the only true form of faith, the only real form of faith. By definition, faith is believing beyond reason. And so he himself, I would say, was truly a knight of infinite resignation, believing beyond faith in something. And so that goes back to that subjective. Even though there were many other people believing in the same thing, he subjectively viewed it in a different way. He subjectively placed different meaning and value on it. So all of these arguments really kind of go back to the idea that this rejection of group thinking, this rejection of group mentality, and this rejection of objective reality in favor of a more subjective existential experience. What makes us happy? So these existential concepts merge with psychology in the field of existential psychology, and while there's recognition that humans are essentially alone in the world, there's the acknowledgement there that we do need to connect with others, that there is a subjective value that individuals place on having meaning in other people's lives, which would kind of go against what Don Juan was doing there. But one of the core beliefs in existential psychology is that we as beings in the world have social, psychological needs, and the relationship with ourselves matters as well, and that we should strive to be our most authentic self in any of these arenas. And so the next time that we talk, we're going to cover concepts of aloneness, interconnectedness, and the Anam Cara, which is, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but it's a Greek word for soul friend or soulmate. So it was great talking to you. If you like my channel, you can subscribe. I know right now I don't have much on there, but there will be more to come. I am kind of coming out full force with some of these concepts and ideas because I think living authentically is really important. So I hope that you come back to my channel, and I hope that you like it and subscribe to it. Thanks so much.